Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Ridenauer, and today is another jam-packed show with a ton of news. Really all sorts of latest developments in the MLB world and everything in between. Hope everyone is staying safe, as always, and healthy. I'm glad some things have started to kind of reopen around here in Pittsburgh slowly but surely. I actually went back to my announcing job not too long ago. I do play-by-play announcing and then PA announcing, and I went back for PA, but not play-by-play yet. Hopefully, by the start of February, I'll be able to get back on the call for some games. But until then, I'm very, very happy doing what I've been doing for the last 10 months and finally getting back into some PA announcing. So just one more thing I get to add to everything else I've been doing. But anyways, enough of all that. Let's get right into this episode because I want to first start off with discussing the latest news in the MLB and all of the recent free agent signings and any other news in the baseball world. There's been another major shakeup in the MLB, so I'll touch on that here soon. After that, I'll get into discussing what predictions I have for the AL East this year, with a few big-time players obviously making their way to certain teams in the division. I'll share where I see the teams falling this year and who is going to, make the biggest and some of the biggest impacts on their new teams. Later on, I'll discuss an article I was reading from The Athletic in regards to the competitive balance tax in baseball and why this offseason has been an interesting case for some teams in trying to stay under that mark without getting hit with the tax. I'll discuss what the tax is, what it is this year, and then how it does affect some teams. And I'll also get into a little bit of a discussion on my opinion on kind of baseball not really having a hard salary cap and what I think that's doing to baseball in kind of the grand scheme of things. But be sure to stick around for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll get into another buy it or deny it segment, and I'll get into whether I buy or deny the idea that the Dodgers could repeat their World Series win. I'll share why I think they will or won't in 2021. So a really good show ahead of us, a lot of different things going on. But I think I'll start first off, getting into the recent news surrounding the Blue Jays, as they were the lucky suitors to land a highly sought-after free agent, one of the biggest free agent names this offseason, George Springer, 6 years, $150 million deal. This is a ginormous move by the Blue Jays, and I think that we all knew going into this offseason, and at least even the early stages of the offseason, this team had expressed an interest in wanting to spend money. I think that they're understanding that they have a nice blend of young talent and then established talent, kind of up-and-coming talent. For instance, Teoscar Hernandez, he had a breakout season in 2020. Lourdes Gurriel, he had a really great season, batted above 300. Randall Grichuk, he was also very good in their outfield. Now you're adding George Springer, so you've got arguably one of the best hitting outfields from last year now going into this year, adding George Springer. And I have to say, George Springer brings a lot to the plate, more, I think, than Randall Grichuk does. I'm going to get into it a little bit here. I don't think Randall Grichuk is a bad baseball player, but I think George Springer, in terms of his power numbers and his pop in his bat, all of that, what the driving of the runs and the production that he'll bring offensively, I think will be much higher than Randall Grichuk. But having Grichuk as kind of that fourth option in the outfield, that's not too shabby. That's a solid kind of utility backup. If somebody's injured and you throw him in there, you're going to be just fine, and you don't have to worry about, oh man, wherever Randall Grichuk is hitting, that's going to be a big hole in our lineup. Not the case. The guy can clearly play. He's established himself as a good baseball player. Now, they were also reportedly going after Michael Brantley, but it was never finalized. It was a very similar situation that we've seen in sports over this offseason. Actually, in the NBA, there was an instance where that happened, where there's an initial report that a team's going to be signing with this team, and then it comes out later that they're not, and then they re-sign somewhere else. So Brantley wound up going with the Astros. He wound up re-signing, 2-year deal. Again, really unfortunate that they weren't able to land him, because if they had landed him and George Springer, wow, that would have been a serious hitting lineup. I mean, that would have been scary, because what you could have done is you could have moved guys around from the DH to the outfield. You could have probably stuck Michael Brantley over at DH. I mean, now in Houston, I'm going to get into it in a little bit here. I don't want to unpack it too much, but with Yordan Alvarez coming back, he's going to be moving to the DH. That means Michael Brantley will probably have to go back out into the outfield. I mean, if he was in Toronto, he probably would not have to do that. He would theoretically, I would think, be a DH. So, hopefully him staying in Houston was a wise move on his part, but if not, I think that he's definitely going to regret not going to Toronto. But it's definitely an aggressive move by the Blue Jays, and I really like this approach that they've got going on. And, I mean, Charlie Montoyo has been, I think, a sensation, really. I mean, he's been a savior for the Blue Jays. He's done such a nice job at slowly over time building this team up into what they are now. And again, with Vlad Jr. hopefully having, or at least on the verge of having a huge year, Kevin Biggio, the same thing. Bo Bichette has clearly proved himself as a very good baseball player. Hyun-Jin Ryu coming off a AL Cy Young finalist season. Robbie Ray gets re-signed there. I don't know what to think of Robbie Ray going there because in all honesty, I'm kind of wishy-washy on how good of a pitcher he still is. Did not have a great season last year. He actually, I will say though, when he got traded from the Diamondbacks, he did wind up having a much better finish to the season than he did with the start. So maybe that was just, he kind of needed a little bit of time to warm up almost. But again, I think that their hitting is completely resolved. They went out and got Kirby Yates, again, a closer that had a very tough 2020, but he had a sensational 2019. So really going after that bullpen pitching. Tyler Chatwood also was signed by the Blue Jays. So they're making, I think, nice, subtle, but yet also loud moves that are, putting people on notice and putting other teams on notice. Hey, we're here to stay. This isn't just some sort of rebuild phase. We're here right now, and we want to win. Now, this is where I'll get into my initial point I mentioned about Springer and Grichuk, and this is why I say that Springer's numbers power-wise are going to be, so much more impactful than Grichuk's. Grichuk has played 7 years in the majors, and 2 of the 7 years, his OPS has been above 800. Springer has played, if not the same amount of time, maybe 1 year more. Let's just say 7 years, just to keep it consistent. He's only had one season in the 7 years where his OPS was below 800. So when you talk about a guy that's had 6 of his 7 years, 7 of his 8 seasons in the MLB with an OPS higher than 800, and a couple years floating with 900, whereas the other guys there's only been 2 years where it was really outstanding, and not even last year. Last year I think he had a 730 OPS, so nothing incredible, nothing terrible, kind of just middle of the road, if you will. But Springer definitely is going to bring a lot of pop into this lineup, and I'm really excited to kind of see how he kind of meshes with the team, right? And they're probably going to put him in center field, so you put Gurriel and you put Hernandez on either end of him in the outfield. I think that's going to really expand not only their defense, but it's going to expand that lineup so much. You can put everybody and anybody everywhere, and I think adding Springer, that's going to be an X factor anywhere you put him in the lineup, whether he hits 4th or he hits 6th, wherever, because you then sprinkle in Hernandez, you sprinkle in Gurriel, you sprinkle in Bichette, so on and so forth. You've got a lot of different guys that you could really work with. Now, Grichuk is still on contract for a little bit longer, so I don't know if they would really get rid of Grichuk in the long term, but they could do a couple of other interesting things in terms of maybe going out and getting some more starting pitching and trying to really bolster up maybe their infield a little bit over at third base, over at second base. Well, Biggio's over at second. So really what they're going to do with third is going to be dependent upon what Vlad Jr. is going to do. Is he going to be a first baseman? Is he going to be a third baseman? Is he going to DH? What's he going to do? So I think that's going to be a big telling sign as to what they then go out and try and get after the fact, because they can't really trade Grichuk because he's on contract for a little bit. Gurriel and Hernandez have been playing very, very well. So I don't know if they really want to go after anybody in the trade market. I think they've got plenty of money to use. Maybe they go out in free agency, they get someone like Didi Gregorius, and they move Bichette over to third. They put Didi at short, Cavan at second, and then put Vlad Jr. at first. That would be a pretty solid starting 9, if you ask me. And then you've got the 3 outfielders. So I think they have a legitimate shot to be one of the top teams in the AL, and really in the AL East especially. I'm excited to see how this team is going to work this year. But again, there was actually, like I mentioned before, there was another player that was going to be involved in this big-time pickup, Michael Brantley. He re-signed with the Astros for a 2-year, $32 million contract, a solid move by Houston, right? I think we all know that if they had let Brantley and Springer walk, that would have been a massive hole in the outfield. Sure, Kyle Tucker is an up-and-coming player. I will give him that. But after that, it would have been very thin. You would have had no other outfield. So good that Brantley was able to stay there because, this team, I can feel it almost starting to crumble. Slowly but surely, one piece is starting to be taken out after another, and I think it's just a matter of time before we start to really see the unraveling of this Astros team. They've got a lot of decisions to make also because Lance McCullers, he'll be a free agent soon. Carlos Correa, he'll be a part of this huge shortstop free agency class this upcoming offseason. So what are they going to do? What do you do with all of these guys that are going to be moving around? And then the only real long-term deals that they have is Alex Bregman, and Jose Altuve. That's it. They don't have anybody else that's on a long extended contract. So they're going to have to still address that center field position because Springer being gone, that's a wide open hole. Brantley will probably play either left or right, and then Kyle Tucker will play the corresponding position. But I will say they could go after Jackie Bradley Jr. And here's why. I think that you could get him for a low price, but a low price on the scale of the Astros payroll. So you wouldn't have to pay some astronomical amount of money, but he would still get his fair compensation. He's coming off a really good season. He batted .283. He had an above 800 OPS. I believe it was at 840. He had, I think, 8-9 home runs. He had a very, very solid season across the board. So you're going to be probably getting him at a good time in his career, and he's a great defensive center fielder. He's going to probably if he puts together any sort of a productive season from the plate, I don't think Springer will be missed at all because Bradley will take over in center and he'll be a way better defender in center field than I think Springer is, in my personal opinion. So I think that Brantley going to stay in Houston's very wise. Again, they bring back some power hitting. He was second on Houston's team last year in OPS behind none other than George Springer. He's batted above 300 the last couple years. He's slugged almost 500 the last couple years. So he's been having a really, really good career in Houston, and it's good that they're going to keep him around for 2 years. It was wise that they said 2 years because he's getting into his early to mid-30s. So who knows how much more time he has in his career before he really starts to see a little bit of a downhill regression. So I think it was wise it was 2 years. And I think that if they continue to try and keep guys around as long as they possibly can, I think that they'll wind up maybe extending or prolonging the kind of collapsing, if you will, of the Astros because, it's just a matter of time, really. I can kind of see it now. I think it's the early stages of it, but I think that soon enough they're going to be kind of where the Cubs are right now. So we'll have to see what happens, but getting into another story now, there's been another team that, again, I've been very critical of this offseason because they've been very quiet, and I don't know why they've been quiet because I think that they are probably one of the least teams that can be quiet this offseason, and it's the Minnesota Twins. They went out and signed 38-year-old pitcher J.A. Happ to a 1-year, $8 million deal. And we've seen instances where pitchers, they continue to have great success and really good careers. Honestly, some of the best baseball they've played well into their 30s. I'm talking late into their 30s. Look at Charlie Morton. Charlie Morton wasn't an all-star until 2018. He didn't even really come about or really kind of make any sort of a name for himself until the 2017 World Series. So we didn't really know about Charlie Morton a whole lot until he was about 37 years old. So there is instances where guys can come in, they can still get it done, even in the old age that they might be in regards to a baseball player at least. But they've been awfully quiet, the Twins have overall. And I think that, you lose Jake Odorizzi to free agency, you lose Rich Hill to free agency. They need to add some depth in that pitching rotation. Jose Barrios, obviously a very good pitcher. Kenta Maeda, he really highlighted that rotation last year. He finished in the Cy Young finalist for the AL last season. And then you also got Randy Dobnak. Randy Dobnak, I was very high up on him midway through the season because he was having a pretty solid season. Now, kind of plateaued a little bit, but I would say for the most part, they've got a decent pitching core, but the hitting is where they need to go out and really build around. I don't know why they haven't done anything hitting-wise. You've got Nelson Cruz, and he's a free agent, and the only other guy on the team that batted above 300 last year for the Twins was Luis Arias, and he only played 23 games. He didn't even play in half the season. So when you got two of your guys that, again, Arias has not really proved himself, I would say, and then Cruz is a free agent, that's a lot of holes in this lineup that you're going to have to fill. Jorge Polanco, he is good. He did have a really solid 2018-2019 season. But after that, it's kind of like they have a lot of young pieces. I think that is the main thing. They've got Mitch Garver. I think that's going to be a really good catcher in the long run. They've got a lot of young pieces that they can work with. A lot of the guys that they have did not have good 2020s. But again, I've mentioned this a million times. It's kind of the theme, and I don't think that we can really fault a lot of these guys for having bad seasons. Sure, it's probably not advisable, and sure, it's probably not widely accepted, but at the same time, it's 60 games. How can you get into any sort of a rhythm when there's this pandemic going on, you're in and out of games are being canceled, it's impossible to get into a flow. And so I think that with these younger guys, it was probably especially challenging because they don't even have close to the service time that some of these older veterans have. So it was probably very difficult for them to get into any sort of a rhythm. So I think with a full season, maybe the Twins know something that I don't, and I hope that they do, because the hitting can be there. They have young talent. It's just a matter of it showing up. I think the pitching is going to figure itself out, because I think they do have good pieces with Barrios. They've got Maida, and I think that Dobnak can be a nice third option for them. Happ maybe falls in that fourth spot in the rotation, maybe the third spot, and they kind of interchange him and Dobnak. But that AL Central is going to be very interesting. I don't know if it's going to be the same kind of AL Central we saw last year, because I think that the White Sox might completely dominate. I mean, maybe not even the Indians. I couldn't even say the Indians are going to have any sort of a shot. I mean, maybe they do, but I would say the next team closest to the White Sox would be the Twins. That would be my next closest. I mean, the Royals, maybe they might slide into a nice third spot, because I do like the moves that they made. It might take them, 2 or 3 years to really get to that first or second spot. But I think that it's going to be kind of the White Sox and Twins running the show here a little bit in the AL Central. But we'll have to see. Again, we've got a little under a month until spring training, and then soon enough we'll have opening day, and then soon enough we'll have a lot of these answers figured out. Now, I'm going to just get into some other rumors that have been going around the baseball, around the MLB, and kind of touch on all the different things that have been popping off and kind of going on with, rumors of free agent signing here, who's interested in who, so on and so forth. The Braves have emerged as a leading candidate for Real Muto. I think that would be perfect for them, in all honesty. It would replace Marcell Ozuna in some regards, and then it would bring in some great defensive help behind the plate. It would definitely be a huge upgrade from Travis Darnell, who he did have a really, really good season in 2020, but defensively he is just so slow, and he is one of the worst defensive catchers in baseball, but he makes up for it with his bat. I will say, though, Real Muto, I don't know if that a team like the Braves are going to want to sign him for all the money that he wants, right? I mean, I think it's going to be kind of a bidding war between or at least maybe the Phillies and a couple other teams, but I think that Real Muto is going to wind up just re-signing with the Phillies. I think that, again, Dave Dombrowski being there is a huge reason why. And I say this all the time, because if you want to be around a winning team, you need to surround yourself with a winning mindset and a winning mentality. And that's what Dombrowski has. And he's got a track record to prove it, that he has won with this mindset and this mentality. It might be intriguing to Real Muto. I mean, think about it. The guy has never been on a winning team, really. He played for the Marlins, and then he comes to Philadelphia, and they're not that great. So I think that he wants a change, and he wants to be on a contending team. And I think that Dombrowski, if he can convince him to stay, that could be huge for them this year. And I think that if not, oh well, but the Braves, they could fall right into second place for Real Muto, and they could be jumping for joy that he fell into their laps. I mean, he would be a ginormous ad, and I would have to say that I would love to see if Real Muto could go and play in every single NL East team. I mean, this would be his third different NL East team that he's played on if he winds up playing for the Braves. Marlins, Phillies, and we'll have to see. So that's one rumor, but then also another one, again, Brad Hand, he's still on the market. A lot of these guys are still on the market, and I'll touch on that, why in a little bit during the competitive balance tax segment, and why that is kind of an issue right now with a lot of these guys not wanting to sign or kind of waiting until the very last minute. But now Brad Hand, he's emerged as a target for the Angels, and he could be, again, a huge ad for them. And this is a team that is in desperate need of pitching. They have made moves going out and getting Joe Musgrove. So they've quietly started to, do the wise thing, I think, and make those added needs and those added changes. I also will have to say that Brad Hand is also being, sought after by the Blue Jays, by the Mets. So all teams that are very interested in rebuilding their bullpens, especially the Mets. I mean, they've had a couple issues with the closing. I know that, with the Blue Jays, if you go out and get Brad Hand, what are you going to do with Kirby Yates? That's the other problem, right? Now you have two closers, unless you transition one of them to kind of a setup guy, maybe an eighth inning guy, and you put Yates as an eighth inning guy or something like that. Because if not, it's going to be very, very interesting to see what they're going to do. And like I mentioned, Yates, he did sign with the Blue Jays, a 1 year, $5.5 million deal. And then Tyler Chatwood, he was signed also. So we'll have to see, right? We'll have to see what's going to happen with the bullpen situation in Toronto. I will say, though, Yates had a tough 2020, so maybe they still want to go and get some kind of just extra baggage, or at least just some extra cushioning in case Yates does not have a good season. You go and get Brad Hand, and he's there as kind of, I don't want to say a backup, if you will, but another option at least to go to. But then again, the Mets, they continue to keep their name in the news. They have also been interested in getting Kike Hernandez, former second baseman, kind of utility guy for the LA Dodgers, and I think it's very wise. I mean, he's a a utility guy. You can stick him really anywhere. They need somebody at second base right now, and I think that it would be very wise for them to put him over there. I mean, the outfield's been pretty much figured out. You got it figured out over at short and first. The catching position's been figured out. Third and second, I would say, are two places that they could maybe address, but third base, in all honesty, could be really anybody, right? I mean, you've got Michael Conforto, you've got Jeff McNeil, you've got J.D. Davis, and you've got Dominic Smith. Those four guys, they're all outfielders, but let's not forget, Jeff McNeil can play in the infield. So if you move some guys around, you'd probably just be just fine. So I'm going to be curious to see if they land Kike Hernandez just out of sheer, hey, we need a guy just to fill the position. You're productive, you're efficient, and you can at least put a bat on the ball and put it in play. So we're going to and they also need a second baseman. Let's face it. Robinson Cano being suspended the entire year did not help their case. So I think that they definitely need to go and address that issue, because if not, it's going to be a little bit of juggling around, and they've already have a lot of juggling around to do right now with Jared Porter being fired and them figuring out a new general manager. So there's going to be a lot of things to get kind of sorted out before the season starts, and we still have a lot of different free agents that have yet to sign. Obviously, DJ LeMahieu re-signing, George Springer finally signing. Now we're waiting for guys like Trevor Bauer, JT Realmuto, Marcelo Zuna. Where are those guys going to land? Because those are some other huge names from this past season that could really make, I think, a huge difference on a lot of different teams. But that'll do it for us in this first segment, folks. But don't go anywhere, because when I get back from the commercial break, I'll dive into the predictions I have for the AL East this year and who I think could make a huge impact in the division this year. Folks, stay right there. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer with you all, and in our first segment, I jumped right into sharing my thoughts on the recent free agency news and all of the new moves really being made recently. Be sure to stay right here, though, with me, folks, for the final few minutes of the show today, as I'll dive into the buy it or deny it as to whether I buy or deny the fact the Dodgers might or could repeat as World Series champions this season. But I want to get into this prediction of the AL East this year and what I could see unfolding within the division this year, and who I think will finish where at the end of the year also, because there's been some major adds across the board. I mean, if you look at some of the guys that have been added and also re-added, if you will, to these certain teams, it's pretty impressive. But then there's also been a lot of losses some teams have had to go through and had to endure because of trades, free agency, and some, I would say, are more drastic of changes than others. So some major adds across the board. I would say the Blue Jays, obviously, you get Kirby Yates. I think that he can be capable of being one of the top closers. He's shown it before, so I'm going to put him there. Then obviously George Springer for the Blue Jays as well. The Yankees, they re-signed DJ LeMahieu. They go out and they signed Corey Kluber. But then if you look at some of these other teams, like the Red Sox, they're losing Jackie Bradley Jr. to free agency unless they re-sign him. The Rays, they've lost Blake Snell and Charlie Morton. So they've lost two of their three main starters, I would say, of their three-man rotation that they really would throw in the playoffs between Snell, Morton, and Tyler Glasnow. So that's a very thin pitching lineup, if you tell me. And I also have to say that the hitting kind of comes into question because they were one of the worst power hitting teams in baseball. I mean, they produced very, very little runs, and I think a lot of the reason why they were so good is because they had such great pitching. Their pitching was unbelievable. And with two of the three main reasons why they were so good pitching-wise gone, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Rays kind of pick up the pieces from this past year and kind of try and put something together this season. And then the Orioles, obviously, they lose Jose Iglesias. They let Renato Nunez walk. And Nunez, I mean, he was their leading home run hitter, and he was and I think he was second on their team in RBIs, batted over 250. So, yeah, not a great average, but I mean, a lot of power, a lot of pop in his bat, and a ton of offensive production that's gone. You don't have that anymore. But they do have a lot of young players, and I'll get into that in a little bit. But it's definitely going to be a different looking division this year. I don't have a whole lot of faith in the Red Sox. I think that coming off a tough year, they were 24-36 this past year. Not great production from guys like Benintendi, JD Martinez. I've honestly heard a lot of things about Benintendi that are not very flattering, such as people feel that in their organization, he's starting to digress a little bit. He's not improving as rapidly, or at least improving at all at the point that he should be. So there's a fear that Benintendi might be kind of a flop and that he might not turn out to be anything that special. They had a great year from Xander Bogaerts, obviously, and then with Rafael Devers over at third, he started off so slow, but then he picked it up towards the end of the year. I was just mostly disappointed in JD JD Martinez, because he's been one of the biggest power hitters in baseball the past couple years. He came over and signed a massive deal. I remember when he went to the Red Sox, I said, oh man, they're going to be really good. And he put up, 38 homers, 120. I mean, he put up some serious numbers. But then obviously the Red Sox, they do bring back Chris Sale. So they're going to try and slowly work him back into shape. I actually read something somewhere where they were saying that I guess the Mets are going to be a little bit more aggressive with Syndergaard, and then the Red Sox are going to be a little bit more careful with Chris Sale. So I'm going to be very intrigued to see how the two approaches for two pitchers, and now I don't mean to cross over into the NL East, but just, kind of crossing over with these two pitchers, it's going to be intriguing to see how the two different ways that they are handled by their respective ball clubs, how that plays a factor in their production this year, but also just their overall longevity in their career. Could this be something that Syndergaard winds up really, I think, coming up short or at least really not benefiting from at all, being thrown right back into it and used aggressively? I mean, we've seen instances where guys like Steven Strasburg, for instance, back a couple years ago, he got thrown into the mix and then they slowly worked him back into it. And I don't know if it's really done wonders for his career in the long run, and so I wonder if Syndergaard is going to be kind of the same way. But then Chris Sale, he might be able to stretch his career out even further than he might have been by slowly working back into it. So we're going to have to see. But this is, again, this division, it's a very, very different division this year. I mean, you don't have the Red Sox, I think, that are going to be the clear-cut front-runner favorites, and the Yankees, they're always going to be up top. So I definitely think that that's not going to change. But in terms of where the Rays are going to be and where the Blue Jays are going to be, I think that's going to be totally different. I think that's going to be completely switched. I think the Blue Jays could legitimately be a top-tier team in that division, a top-2 team at least. And when you think about it, that division across the board, it's very competitive. The Yankees, Jays, and Rays, they all had records above 500. So they clearly came out very, very strong last year, and they were able to keep that up. The Orioles, they came out very strong as well, but then they kind of fizzled out towards the end. I think that they surprised a lot of people, and I'm curious if they could really surprise people again this year. I mean, they've got a lot of young talent, and although they let Nunez go, you try and keep Hanser Alberto around, Ryan Mountcastle. You got some pieces that you can really build with. I'm very curious to see what their pitching situation is going to be like this year, and if they're going to be able to figure out anything along the lines that they could really help them out, because their starting pitching kind of suffers, I think, and also their bullpen pitching. So they need to address that first and foremost. But then there's been some major adds, again, from other teams in the division, obviously. I mean, I know I mentioned Kirby Yates and George Springer and then Corey Kluber for the Yankees, and, obviously Yates and Springer to the Jays, respectively. But Michael Wacha getting added for the Rays, I don't know if that's a major add, but he's an established guy. He's somebody that he's not going to obviously make up for what Snell and Morton are going to be bringing, and he's not going to fix that. He's not going to patch that hole up. But I think that he could maybe have a decent year, and it could be some reliable pitching that they get. Now, the Orioles and Red Sox have been fairly quiet this offseason. They haven't really done anything crazy. But I will say with the Red Sox, and I forgot to mention it earlier, but I'll mention it now, they had a nice emergence of Christian Vasquez last year. I was a big fan of him behind the plate. Batted a solid, I believe, around 270, 280, had a fairly good year, started off really hot, actually, was batting well over 300. So I think that if they can develop him a little bit, Xander Bogaerts, Rafael Devers, they all have really good years. JD Martinez gets back to the standard that he should be at. They might be a better team than people think that they're going to be, especially myself. Benintendi is just, I think they need to get rid of him. I don't know why they still have him. I really, to the life of me, I compare him to kind of Dansby Swanson, but Dansby Swanson has taken such large leaps in comparison to Benintendi in their careers. And I just think it's kind of sad, because Benintendi coming in was a highly sought prospect. A lot of people were really high up on him, and he has just not panned out well at all for the Red Sox. So I think that could also play a little bit of a detrimental fact to the Red Sox success this year. But like I mentioned, I'm very skeptical of the Rays. I would say the Rays and the Red Sox, I'm very skeptical of. I'm very kind of weary of what they're going to do, because for the Rays, I just don't think the way that they went about last year is going to be a sustainable way of winning, because you can't just keep winning game after game without having any power hitting. I think that they got very lucky with it being a 60-game season, because I really do wonder and I really do question if they would have won the division, if they would have had the year that they had last year, if we had played 162 games. If you had said, all right, we're rolling the ball out there and we're playing 162 games, I would question whether or not they could put up and continue with that level of play and that offensive and defensive pace the entire season, right? I just don't see that happening. So I think they got kind of lucky last year because the way that they went about it is just not a sustainable way of winning. And having Snell and Morton gone, that's going to even drive down the point of that even more. Now you really can't go to your pitching and can't rely on it heavily. You're going to have to hope that Randy Arozarena, G-Man Choi, Kevin Kiermaier, Joey Wendell, these guys are going to be able to come up for them and produce. Mike Zunino, they went out and re-signed Mike Zunino. Not sure how I feel about that. He kind of reminds me a little bit of a Darnell, a solid hitting catcher that's not outstanding. I mean, Darnell's a better hitting catcher than Zunino is, but still a solid hitting catcher, but a terrible defensive catcher. The guy's slower than molasses behind the plate, right? So I think that's going to really play a piece into that, but I really have my eyes on the Jays. And obviously the Yankees, of course. I mean, you've got LeMahieu, you've got Stanton, you've got Judge, Torres, Urshela, Sanchez, Garrett Cole, now Corey Kluber. The list just goes on. I mean, Luke Voigt. The list goes on and on and on and on. I don't know what to think of their bullpen quite yet and the depth of their pitching quite yet because, yeah, they've got Chapman coming out of the pen, sure, but who else do you have coming out of the pen, right? After Cole and Kluber, how big of a drop-off is it going to be? I think it's going to be another year of them really heavily relying on that hitting. And sure, they've got a lot of hitting, so it can be spread out over a longer, it can spread out through an entire lineup. But look at why the Dodgers, I think, were so successful last year because everything they did hitting-wise at such a high level, they did the exact same pitching-wise. They were, and I'll get into it in a little bit because I'm actually going to reference the Dodgers a little bit later in the show and get into kind of the different rankings that they were in the league. That's why they were so good because the pitching was the big difference. The Yankees, they need to have extra pitching. They need to have deeper pitching to be able to make these runs deep into the playoffs and be able to get over the hump of playing against a team like the Rays, right? Because I think that was the biggest thing was even though the Rays, they didn't necessarily smack the Yankees, it was just enough to get by. It was just enough to get by. And so that's why I think, they need to really just go after hardcore, more pitching. Maybe they could pick up a guy like Jake Odorizzi. I mean, he would be, talk about a great little three-man starting rotation right there. You've got Cole, you've got Kluber, and you've got Odorizzi. You've got three guys, they're all stars. They can definitely play at high levels. They could be really, really good, I think. I probably would not have been as confident in them, honestly, if they hadn't signed DJ LeMahieu. That was a big tipping point for me. I think that getting him back, and again, Kluber, I have to be a little bit careful with how I talk about that because Kluber, we don't really know what to expect from him. I mean, he's really been out of baseball the last 2 years. He's only had, I believe, 8 starts in the last 2 seasons. Now, from 2014 to 2018, he was one of the best pitchers in baseball. Every single year except for one, he had 18 or more wins. He was a 2-time Cy Young winner in that span of time. He was a 3-time All-Star. The guy can definitely pitch, but it's just, does he have that same juice and that same level of pitching that he had between 2014 and 2018, now post-injuries, after the fact that he's had some shoulder problems, some arm issues? That is not an injury that is going to be pleasant or forgiving for a pitcher in the long run at all. I just think that they need to figure out a little bit more pitching in the case that Kluber gets injured again or he's not panning out. And then in that case, then you're really just putting all of the load on Garrett Cole, and you can't do that. The guy can only do so much. Sure, he's a great pitcher, but I think the reason why he was so good in Houston was because there was other good pitchers there. There was Justin Verlander, there was Zach Greinke, Lance McCullers was even pretty decent. Charlie Morton was even pretty good then. So you had other guys that they could go to that it wasn't just Garrett Cole. So then other teams were kind of guessing, all right, and they couldn't keep track of everybody. Now it's very easy. Okay, we can center all of our attention on Garrett Cole when we're doing our scouting reports and when we're looking at our opponent, and we don't really have to worry about anybody else in the rotation in this 3-game series. We're going to just be able to, if we can get through Cole, then we can get through anybody. That's kind of the mentality I think some of these teams in this division are going to have. But I mentioned it in the first segment, and I'll mention it again, this Blue Jays team with the youth that they have and then the additions that they made, I think that they could be a second-place team. I really do. And I that might be an aggressive or a bold take and kind of a little bit going out on a limb here with just one big move that they made. but they haven't even come close to that competitive balance tax yet. I mean, they're still way under it. So they could go out and sign somebody else. And not to mention, I mean, look, they offered DJ LeMahieu a 4-year, $70-some million deal. So they've got no problem offering guys money, right? I think that if they can get a guy like Brad Hand, or if they can get a guy like Jake Odorizzi, some other pitching, maybe get somebody at second base or shortstop or third base, maybe they can get a Justin Turner. Who knows? I mean, Justin Turner, this is how I would probably go about it. I would try and do this. You already have Robbie Ray, who's going to probably be an all right kind of alternate starter, or somebody that you can kind of just go to in a third game of a 3-game series. Hyun-Jin Ryu is going to be your ace. You go out and get Jake Odorizzi, sign him for like a 3-year deal. You don't have to pay him a whole bunch of money. I think that you could definitely, if he tries to argue for a ton of money, you could say, no thanks, you're not worth that much money. Then you can go out and get a guy like Brad Hand. Then you can maybe sign him for a smaller deal. So if you could get Odorizzi on a 3-year deal, get Hand on a 2-year deal, yeah, you're kind of shrinking the window that you have for yourself to win, but at the same time, you're also solidifying that you're going to be set in different kind of sectors of your team. Bullpen-wise, Brad Hand coming out of the pen, he's going to be really good. And then you've got Kirby Yates there as well, who could be as kind of a top-tier setup guy. Then you've got in the rotation Jake Odorizzi, you've got Robbie Ray, and Hyun-Jin Ryu. And then all of a sudden, you've got a ton of hitters all over the place that can really do damage at any point of the lineup. Now you've got a totally different ball team. You've got a completely different setup of guys, and I think that's going to really pay off for the Blue Jays in the long run. And again, the only thing that kind of concerns me about the Blue Jays, and the same thing with the Yankees, is just health. Really, just everybody's health, everybody's safety. Obviously, with COVID still probably going to be going on in the summertime, but then also just injury-wise, right? I mean, who knows how much time these guys are going to get for spring training? They come in, if they're playing a full 162-game season, how ready are they going to be? How often are cancellations going to be? If that's a factor, could that throw teams off? Could that set teams back? Could that kind of throw guys out of whack a little bit and really throw guys off of a rhythm a little bit? We'll have to see. We can only wait and see until now, right? So my prediction of this division is going to go something like this. This is how I kind of see it playing out. I think the Yankees are going to win. I think the Yankees are going to win the division this year. I think that they're hungry. They've gone out and made some moves. They've re-signed DJ LeMahieu. So I think that they are feeling very confident and very set that they can really make a push for the AL division, or at least the AL East division. And not to mention, you go out and you get, again, some great hitters, but you go out and get reliable pitching as well. Now, I'm going to go with the Blue Jays coming in second place because of, again, the recent ads that they had, some of the best hitting in the outfield, arguably the best hitting outfield in the AL, in my opinion. Then you go down to 3, 4, 5. This is how I'm going to go with it. I'm going to put the Red Sox at 3. I think that the Red Sox are 2 years away to getting back to where they were. I think it's going to take Sale a little bit of time to get back to his normal rhythm. It's going to depend on if guys like Devers and Bogarts and Martinez can step up this year and really play well. And also, how are they going to fix that center field hole that they have right now with JBJ not there anymore? So I think it's 2 years down the road, maybe 3, until the Red Sox are back to where they were. But I'm going to put them at 3rd. I'm going to put the Rays at 4th because I think that they lost the most out of this entire division. They lost a big chunk of their pitching rotation. They don't have that much power hitting to even begin with, so it's not like they're returning a bunch of guys that are going to have huge years. I mean, the most of the guys that they have on their team, I would say, are kind of slap hitters, except for maybe G-Man Choi and Randy Arozarena. Kevin Kiermaier, maybe here and there, but Joey Wendell, he's just like a solid singles guy that's just going to get on base for you. Same thing with Manuel Margot. I know they re-signed a lot of guys, so they all had to, obviously avoid arbitration, but at the same time, it's not like you went out and got any major pieces. I think that they'll still be good, but it's going to be a struggle. So I'm going to put them at 4th. 5th, though, obviously, the Orioles. I just don't think this is going to be the Orioles' year, right? I think that we can all agree this Orioles team is probably 4 years down the road from being really, really good. If they can get guys like Ryan Mountcastle, Adley Rutschman, he's their up-and-coming catcher, actually one of the best catchers in the MLB pipeline, Hanser Alberto. All of these guys can really continue to perform and continue to develop. Obviously, losing Nunez, that's a huge guy that you're going to have to replace because, again, he was one of your leading RBI guys, and then he led your team in home runs last year. He was one of a few guys to even have double-digit home runs. So they're going to have to really figure that out, I think, but it's going to be an interesting season nonetheless in the AL East. I'm really excited to see how it pans out because the Blue Jays are the must-watch team, I think, in that division. I'm very curious to see, can Teoscar Hernandez have the same year he had last year? Was that kind of just a fluke? Was Jords Gurriel's year kind of a fluke? That's another thing that people might be asking. Were they just beneficiaries of a shortened MLB season? Was that kind of just a one-year wonder kind of thing? But I really don't think so, because, Hernandez has got such a nice swing. He's got a tall frame. He's got a lot of power, a lot of strength in his bat. Same thing with Gurriel. He's got a lot of power in his bat too. But then you got guys like Bo Bichette, and then how can we forget about Vlad Jr., right? Vlad Jr., I don't even think he's even had close to what the expectation has been set for him. Not even close to it. So I think that he's still getting better. He's still improving. He's still on his uprise in the MLB. Same thing with Cavan Biggio. So they've got a lot of things to figure out, but I am very curious about this AL East and how things will shake out. But folks, that's going to close it out here for us in our second segment on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Thanks again for tuning in. Coming up after the commercial break, I'll discuss the worries some teams have about the collective bargaining tax, the competitive balance tax, and how the raising of the payroll in baseball helps and hurts some teams. And I'll really just get into a little finance segment, if you will, in the MLB. It's been a lot of fun so far, folks, but we got a lot more to go. So don't change that channel, ladies and gentlemen. We'll be right back here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Welcome back to the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Great to have you all here still with me today. Jack Ridenauer again. And in the previous segment, I jumped into discussing a little prediction of the AL East and how I see these new pieces that have been added working out in the long run for some of these teams. But I want to now kind of switch gears and get into discussing the issues and problems that could arise for teams with the competitive balance tax rising and the overall kind of payroll number also going up, and just kind of all sorts of little financial things that have been going on, and also like my thoughts on if baseball should have a salary cap, and if so, what it should be and how it should be regulated, so on and so forth. So we're just going to get into a little bit of unpacking of the finances of the MLB, especially recently. So basically, just to kind of give everybody what the competitive balance tax is, it's basically kind of a threshold where teams that might exceed a certain amount of money on a yearly basis, if they go over that, then they have to pay a certain amount of a tax. The tax is based on, I believe it's every dollar that they spend over that limit, that is what they are taxed on. So this year, the competitive balance tax, I believe the threshold is set at $210 million. So if a team exceeds that in their spending, and when they go out and sign guys and get guys contracts, this, that, and the other, then if they go over that limit, then they have to start paying a tax on that. So this is a huge part, I think, as to why a lot of free agents haven't signed yet, because some of these guys, they want a huge amount of money, right? And they want a lot of money that could possibly really, I think, strap a lot of teams financially to go out and do any other kind of spending, right? I mean, guys like JT Realmuto, Trevor Bauer, they have expressed that they want $200 million contracts. That would give a team that, okay, yeah, there are probably teams out there that could afford that, teams like the Dodgers or the Yankees or the Mets. But then that kind of limits where they can go after the fact. They can't really go out and spend anything else. It's kind of like, all right, we're either going all in, we're getting this one guy, and we're hoping that he pays off in the end, because if not, we're not going to be able to really go out and get any other pieces this offseason, and we're going to have to just wait until next year to maybe be able to do that. So I think that the competitive balance tax is a very, very wise thing, because in all honesty, if there wasn't any sort of ceiling or any sort of limit, teams would just spend however much money they want or however much money they have. And that's why you get into these kind of which teams have larger payrolls, which teams' owners are willing to spend more money, and that's what it boils down to, is which owner is going to spend the larger sum of money. And I think that if teams like, for example, the Yankees or the Astros or the Cubs, if they go over it, it's probably, again, something that they don't want to have to do, but it's not as bad as if a team like the Cardinals or the Brewers or even the Rockies, if they went over it, it would probably be very detrimental. Mind you, they probably wouldn't even touch it at that point. But the Yankees, Astros, and Cubs all had to pay that competitive balance tax in 2020. They all exceeded the amount, and the amount has gone up. I believe from 2017 to 2020, it has increased ever so slightly each and every single year. I will say, though, this year, I don't see any three of those teams hitting the mark. I mean, we all know the Cubs are rebuilding. We already have started to see that. Yu Darvish being traded, Kyle Schwarber being released, and then before you know it, they're probably going to trade Chris Bryant along the way, somewhere along the lines, I would think. Anthony Rizzo, he's going to be a free agent soon enough. Javi Baez, he'll be a free agent soon enough. So they're going to be really loosening up their payroll a lot here very, very soon. The Astros, they've let some guys go off their payroll, George Springer in particular, and then the Yankees, they didn't really go out and splurge, I would say. I think LeMahieu on a 6-year, $90 million deal, was very fair. I think that the time and kind of the amount of years, it's a little bit long in my opinion, especially with just how much you don't really know of what his career is going to look like in 5 years from now, 4 years from now. He's really only an injury away and not great recovery to being, I would say, on the very, very tail end and kind of washed up, if you will, in his career, because he's getting into his mid-30s. Now, there are cases where guys can extend that further on in their career. I don't know if LeMahieu can do that. But at the end of the day, I think that all three of not many teams, I think, are going to even come close to that. Maybe the Mets. But because of the overall just financial losses because of the pandemic, I don't see many teams even coming close to the tax. Now, the tax has been around since 1997, and I think that honestly, in all honesty, I'm very curious to again, I'd probably have to do a little bit more background research on this, but what baseball spending was like prior to the tax. I mean, were teams spending an astronomical amount of money back then? But at the same time, I mean, we have to go back into the 70s and the 80s, even the 60s. Money was not the value that it is nowadays. So who knows what kind of taxes or if there was even any sort of taxes back then and what teams were spending in comparison to today is probably light years of a difference in the money that is being spent now versus the money that was spent back then. And they've started, I think, to realize, at least some teams, that it really makes no sense, especially nowadays with the expanding of the playoffs and this, that, and the other. Why go out and spend an astronomical amount of money to try and build some sort of super team to then potentially get hit with a tax and have to pay back a lot of the money that they spent? That's a lot of, I think, financial headache, if you ask me. I mean, what's the difference if you make the division championship or you get to the playoffs or you make the wild card with 88 wins versus 92? It doesn't really make that big of a difference. So why would they have to go out and spend an exuberant amount of money to try and push them up, 4 more wins or 6 more wins or 10 more wins? If 88 wins or 90 wins or 91 wins is going to do it, then that, I think, can allow teams to still have a lot of money to play around with. So if they want to go into the season not of spending a whole bunch in the offseason, then as the season goes on, you approach the trade deadline, then you can say, all right, I might want to go out and spend a little bit more money, and you have that money to spend. It's interesting to see and really hear how important also this tax is for some teams to stay under, because if they exceed it over and over again, they're going to be in the hole. And that's not a great thing to have, especially the owners. They don't want to have to deal with that. They don't want to have that potential of, oh man, I'm having to pay a lot more in taxes than I am paying my players. That's kind of an issue. So that's kind of the little bit of a background on the competitive balance tax. Now, a couple thoughts that I have about it and kind of, what I think of just the overall finances of baseball in general. Yeah, there should be a salary cap in baseball. I'm not going to lie to you. I think that there should be a salary cap in baseball because it's going to, what it encourages and what it's continuing to encourage is this idea of top-heavy baseball. And what I mean by this is all the teams that you can probably guess just based on the size of the market that they're in, LA, New York, Chicago, all these teams, Houston even, Miami is a little bit of an exception, but in other sports, probably Miami, again, LA, New York, Chicago, and Miami, I would say are the 4 bigger ones. You could probably throw in teams like DC or Houston, like I mentioned, whatever. They can go out and spend way more money because they just have a larger payroll. They're in a larger market. They can make a lot more money. And as a result, it kind of makes only those teams good. And it really centralizes the amount of teams that are going to be on the top of baseball. And it's just a very narrow group. And then after that, there's kind of this huge drop off. And it's kind of, okay, which other run-of-the-mill team is going to kind of come out of nowhere and maybe surprise us? But there should be a salary cap. In other sports, they have it. And I think it allows for the competitive balance to be very, very even. It kind of evens the playing field a little bit there, a lot more than I think it does in baseball. I mean, look at some of these teams like the Dodgers, the Yankees, and the guys that they have on their team, and it's like, how are you affording, especially with the price that baseball comes with and how much money some of these guys want? In my opinion, I think sometimes it's way too much money, but you've got Stanton, you've got Judge, you've got Cole. Those are 3 huge, big-time players that are on ginormous contracts, and it's kind of like a team like the Nationals. They could probably pay maybe 1 or 2 of those guys. I mean, they are paying their own guys a certain amount of money, but a team like the Cardinals or a team like the Rockies or the Mariners or the Athletics, the Braves, they couldn't afford all of those guys on the same team. There's just no way, especially with the money that they want. And I think that having these bigger teams in these larger markets being kind of the top of baseball and then everybody else is kind of subservient to them, I think that is what in times or at certain points, kind of muddies the water of baseball and really waters down the talent and kind of the overall reception that some of these teams can get, because all you're seeing is the Dodgers, the Yankees, the Cubs. That's all you're really seeing. The Mets, not even the Angels in some regards. Teams like the Padres now, I feel like, are going to start changing that mold. Teams like the White Sox, maybe. They're starting to maybe switch things up a little bit. And so as a result, you can kind of play around a little bit more, and it'll expand the pool of top-tier teams in the league. And again, at times, it's going to be very obvious to guess who's going to be at the top of baseball and who's going to be the best ones and who's going to be the best players. And if these taxes aren't put into place, teams will be able to just run wild financially. They'll be able to do whatever they want, whenever they want, and pay however much they want. And I just have a problem with that, because and again, I might be biased in some regards because I do root for a team that is in a mid-market like the Brewers. But if you just look at the overall landscape of baseball and you look at the teams that have been at the top over the last few years, Boston, how could I forget Boston? The teams over the past few years that have gone to the World Series and that have gone far into the playoffs, 9 times out of 10, you're going to see a team either from LA, Houston, Boston, or New York in those kind of situations. You've had some exceptions to the rule. The Brewers in 2018, the Rays this past year. You have some exceptions to the rule, but you don't have many teams that I would say are shaking up the entire landscape of baseball and saying, yeah, we're going to steal this World Series away from you. I mean, the winners of the World Series, I would say since 2016, have all come from large markets. Really, that's really what it's been, large markets. You've got Houston, you've got Chicago, you've got Boston, you've got LA. Now, you also do have, in 2015, you had a mid-market team like the Royals. That's, I feel like, when baseball starts to branch out and you can start to say, okay, there are other good teams in the league that can afford good players. Now, I also think that, in all honesty, I think that just how kind of baseball works in a general scheme of things, if they can continue to try and broaden out and branch out and have more teams that can kind of break that mold of, okay, all the mid-major or all the mid-market teams, they can't really do a whole lot. So teams like the Royals or teams like the Brewers who are able to make that difference. Now, again, getting back to the original point, the Royals and the Brewers, well, the Royals more so, I think that they got a little lucky. And a lot of these mid-market teams, I think they get lucky. They get guys on a lower amount of money, not these huge contracts, and they wind up becoming really good players. And then the problem you have with that is they don't want to stay. They want to leave. They want to move. Look at Francisco Lindor, perfect example, right? Mid-market team, I would say. Cleveland is a mid-market team. It's not a ginormous fan pool, I would say. It's not a huge market. They're not in a huge ginormous, I would say, they're a populated area, but it's not like New York or LA. And where does he go? New York. Same thing with Garrett Cole. Garrett Cole went from Pittsburgh to Houston, and then where did he go? New York. Mookie Betts, he went from Boston to LA, he went from one extreme to the other, but it's still the same thing. You're not going to get many guys that are going to want to veer off of the path that they're on and trying to get a lot of this money. Now, again, George Springer, though, this is a very interesting case because I don't think of Toronto as a huge market. I don't think of them as a major market. I think that maybe in terms of, and again, they're in a different country, so I don't know really what kind of reception there is to baseball overall, but I would say that they're a mid-market team. This is a very odd kind of exception to the rule, right? Where a guy from Houston is leaving to go to a team in Toronto. Now, they did pay him a ginormous amount of money, and he did sign the only 9-figure deal so far this offseason. So there is an exception to the rule at times. Obviously, there's going to be. But I think that it just gets old seeing these same teams over and over again being really, really good. Now, obviously, you can't really do anything if you're a team like the Pirates and your owner just doesn't want to spend money. There are exceptions, again, to the rule that teams like the Rays or teams like the Athletics, two teams that I would say have kind of been in the centerfold of, and really the examples to lead by, of teams that can still win with low payrolls, but there's not many of them. San Diego, I think, is starting to become a little bit of a larger market because of the guys they've gone out and gotten, probably also the team that they've started to build. I mean, you've got Manny Machado, you've got Blake Snell, you've got Yu Darvish, you've got a lot of guys that you're going to be paying a lot of money for. And so I think that they are starting to also break the mold, but it's going to take a little bit of time, I think, until there is even any sort of balancing out or just leveling of the playing field in a broader sense. I mean, even teams like San Francisco, right? That's another pretty large market. Anywhere on this, I would say the coasts that, for the most part, they're going to be your larger markets. I think Atlanta might be a little bit of an exception. It's a middle of the road market. I mean, I wouldn't say that it's a middle market or a low market or a high market. It's probably an upper middle market team, right on the cusp of being a large market, but they're not quite there yet. But I would like to see, as time goes on, a little bit of a change in this, right? I would like to see teams that are able to build successful franchises winning these huge free agents over and saying, hey, come and play with us. Hey, I want you over in our team. Hey, why don't you come and sign this ginormous deal with us? And you start to see, okay, now these other big-time players, George Springer, he might be a pioneer in this if you think about it. Maybe we'll see a guy like Marcell Ozuna go to a team that nobody really expects because it's like, hey, you know what? He's going to Toronto. He left Houston. I don't want to go back to Atlanta. I want to kind of broaden out and go to another team that's going to be competitive. Maybe he'll go to Chicago and play for the White Sox. Maybe he'll go to Houston. I mean, again, those aren't really huge differences from Atlanta, but it's going to branch out the teams that are going to be good, and it's not going to be the same teams over and over again. And in other sports, you do have that same problem, right? You have teams like in the NBA, for the most part, a lot of the West Coast teams are going to be really good. And then you've got a couple of the top-tier East Coast teams. But after that, it falls off drastically. And I just think that overall in sports, and especially in baseball, because I think that's where it's going to start, because these guys get paid the most amount of money out of any professional athlete, in my opinion. The contracts that they have signed, I mean, there is no other, except for Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes is an exception to the rule, being signed to a $500 million contract. But the amount of close to $500 million contracts there are in the MLB right now, or at least over $250, $350 million deals, probably a lot more than there are in the NFL, the NHL, might rival the NBA here and there, I guess. But for the most part, MLB guys, I would say across the board, they get paid the most. And so it would be nice to see a guy from the Red Sox go to a team like the Brewers, or a guy from the Yankees go to a team like the Rockies, or a guy from the Giants going and playing for the Diamondbacks, something like that, and just switching kind of the pool of play and kind of just changing the trajectory and just kind of changing things up a little bit, switching of scenery almost. But will that happen? I don't know, because at the end of the day, guys are going to want the most amount of money. They're going to want the money that they deserve. And these teams, until there is a payroll put into place, or at least a salary cap, they're going to spend however much money that they want and that they can to get these players. But again, with this competitive balance tax, I think it's great that it's in place, because it does at some point limit the amount of spending a team can do, or at least have a bit of a consequence, if you will. If you're going to go out and spend X, Y, and Z all the time, you're not going to be able to do that. So hopefully as time goes on, we see a little bit of a broadening of the pool of players, but I don't really see it anytime soon. I think that it's just going to be, another year of kind of the same teams being really good. But hey, with these recent signings and with these recent moves, we might start seeing other teams that are going to shake up things, and we're not going to see the Red Sox and the Yankees and the Dodgers all the time, or the Cubs. We're going to start seeing maybe teams like the Padres or the White Sox or the Blue Jays. A little bit of a change of scenery, which I'm very excited for, and honestly, I think it's going to just be refreshing to see some new teams win in any sort of situation, whether it's in the regular season, the playoffs, whatever. It's just going to be nice to see, again, a little bit of a change of scenery. So that'll do it for this segment, folks. Thanks again for sticking around. Stay right there, though, because we'll be right back after this commercial break for the final segment today, where I'll be back in another Buy It or Deny It segment discussing whether or not I buy or deny the idea that the Dodgers could potentially repeat as World Series champions this year. Folks, don't go anywhere, everyone, because we've got one last segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Hey everyone, and welcome back for the final segment here on the GSMC Baseball Podcast. Jack Ridenauer still with you, and in the previous segment, I discussed what the competitive balance tax is and the various aspects that come with it, and why this is a unique year for some teams who go after certain players because of the increase in the amount and other things that come with it, really. I want to wrap up today, though, with another Buy It or Deny It, and just dive right into, I should say, and discuss whether I buy or deny the idea of the Dodgers repeating the World Series this year. Now, history's not really on their side, I would say. The last time that a team has repeated a World Series was the Yankees in 1999 and then in 2000. But since then, no other team has done it since then. So again, that's been 20 years. So maybe they can break that mold, but I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that. It's so hard in sports repeating championships, right? I mean, you talk about some of the greatest teams ever. For case in point, the New York Yankees, when they were winning World Series after World Series after World Series, that's a challenging thing to do, to be at the top of your game year in and year out and to completely and utterly just give your all, your entire blood, sweat, and tears into something, a collective goal on a team, and go out and win a championship to that degree. It's very difficult. It's very, very difficult to do that. And I think that as a result, it's probably very challenging, especially in the MLB and in baseball. I mean, you have 162 games to get through initially, and then you have probably another, I would say, if you're going to the World Series, 20 or so games. So you're playing almost 200 games in a season, and then you're doing that again the next year and winning again. You have to either have absolute studs on your team, or you just have to have a lot of really, really good luck. Now, I will say, they've been to the World Series consistently over the last few years. They've gone to the World Series 3 of the last 4 years. They won it this past year, obviously, and they had a tough time just getting out of any sort of getting out of the World Series and winning earlier, before. The loss to the Astros, loss to the Red Sox, then they lose to the Nationals in the playoffs, then they finally win the World Series. So a lot of different stuff has gone on for the Dodgers in the last couple years, and they've kind of been the bridesmaid, but never the bride, if you will. And I think that that's definitely played a little bit of a part in their desire to finally win a World Series. But my question is, are they going to become complacent and say, okay, we did it, we're done, let's just take a seat back and just relax? We have finally checked that off our list. Could they come back hungrier than ever this year? Maybe, maybe not. I wouldn't say they're losing anyone drastic. I mean, Kike Hernandez, he's a free agent. Justin Turner, he's a free agent. You re-sign Blake Trinan. Justin Turner, though, I'm going to say he is a huge part of this team. I know that he's not somebody like Cody Bellinger, and that's the other thing. They still won a World Series, and Cody Bellinger had a terrible season last year. They still have Cody Bellinger, Jock Peterson, Max Muncy, Corey Seager, Chris Taylor, Clayton Kershaw, Kenley Jansen, Will Smith, I think, is on the rise of becoming a really, really, really good catcher. So losing Justin Turner is a big thing because he was the kind of heart and soul of this. I mean, Mookie Betts, how could I forget about Mookie Betts? Justin Turner is the heart and soul of this team overall, right? I mean, he was the heartbeat. I mean, even I think Mookie Betts said it, and I think Cody Bellinger said it too. Turner was kind of the centerpiece to this entire team this past year, and really why they were able to go all the way, because of his leadership, because of the veteranness that he brings to the table. And I just feel like if he's gone, they're not going to really have that to go to. They're not going to really have that mentality to kind of, I would say, bounce off of, or at least push them into a winning direction. Obviously, you have Mookie Betts, who's now won two World Series. Everybody is now experienced in winning a World Series, so I think that is a very good thing. I think that in some weird way, I don't know why I'm drawing this correlation, but Justin Turner might have been a vehicle or kind of a catalyst for this Dodgers team to finally get over that hump to win a World Series, and then it's like, okay, we got what we wanted, you got what you wanted, and now we're going to just part ways, because these guys, they're ready. They know what it takes now. They've had that experience. They've had that taste in their mouth of wanting to win a World Series, and now they can go back out and do it. But we thank you for getting us there, because you were the reason why we were there, and we'll never forget that. I could see that being a reason Justin Turner goes, because this Dodgers team might say, hey, we've got a lot of young guys. They've been there. They've done that. We have experience still with Mookie Betts. He's also won one with another team. So now you're thinking, okay, do we really need Justin Turner? Do we really need to sign him to another deal? He's 36, going to be 37. He's going to get older. He's not going to be getting, I would say, any better, at least. I mean, he did have a really good year in 2020. I will give him that. He had a great season in 2020, especially being the age that he is. But I just think that, in all honesty, to get back to that level, it's going to take a lot. I know that they might get David Price back, but who knows if that's going to happen? I mean, David Price sat out this past year because of the virus, and who knows with what the virus holds this summer and what the future is with that. Maybe he says, yeah, I'm going to just keep on sitting out. I'm not going to go back out to that. No, sirree, not going to do that. Who knows what he'll do? Who knows what he'll decide? Because I think that's going to be another kind of telling sign of, all right, Does David Price want to come back? If not, then we're going to have to really scramble around. But they won the 1 year that he wasn't there. So now this would have been his first year with the Dodgers. So I don't know if he would have had that big of an impact or if he could have possibly hindered the team in some way. But I think that he still is going to be a huge difference maker. And let's not forget this Dodgers team, they almost didn't make it, right? They were down 3-1 to the Braves. They were able to buckle down, and they came up with a huge comeback in the NLCS. But I just don't know if they can do it again this year, right? I mean, that's so hard to – I mean, I'll put it to you this way. If they go down – if they make it to the same point that they were in last year and they go as far as they did and they find themselves in a similar situation – I would say on one side that I could see them coming back and winning, but I could say on another side, I could not see them coming back and winning. I could see them saying, maybe they're just too exhausted or it's just too challenging to do that year in and year out, being in that 3-1 deficit, facing elimination game after game, 4 straight games, and not to mention facing elimination in other rounds. So it's a lot for guys to bear, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, just having that utter and complete focus every single day, knowing that you could be going home at any point in time. That's got to take a toll on your mental psyche and just being focused for the game. But it could also help you out. It could keep you even sharper and much more dialed in than usual. Now, the team, though, I would say overall, they are not going to be losing, I think, any major pieces. And that's a good thing because 5 of their 9 starters this past year had an 800 or higher OPS. And not to mention, Cody Bellinger wasn't even one of those guys. So if you throw him in there and say, okay, he's going to have a much better year this year, it could swing them right back up into a huge uptick, and they could be, honestly, the favorite to win it again. Now, they also had 5 guys with 12 or more home runs in their lineup. And then out of those 5 guys, 4 of them tossed in 30-plus RBIs. So that's when you know you've got a really scary lineup, when you've got guys that are not only putting up huge home run numbers in a small, condensed season, but also huge RBI numbers. And it's multiple guys on the team, not just one. And not to mention, the starting pitching was sensational. Every single starter that started 8 or more games this year had under a 4 ERA each. Everybody was between a 2 and a 3 ERA. So that aspect right there, I think, is going to be a huge separating factor for them because whatever they did hitting-wise, that was great. They counterbalanced it with great pitching. They were great in both categories, and I think that was what kind of pushed them over the edge, if you will. But we have to remember what other teams have made some big acquisitions. And I think this is going to be my main point, is there's just been so much talent that is dispersed amongst the league. And now you have again, I talked about in the last segment, the talent pool is now spread out amongst so many different teams. The Padres in their own division with the Dodgers. They go on and get Blake Snell. They go and get Yu Darvish. Then you got the Nationals. They get John Lester, Josh Bell, Kyle Schwarber. The Mets have Francisco Lindor, James McCann, Carlos Carrasco. The White Sox, although they're in a different league, they could run into each other in the World Series. Who knows? Lance Lynn, Liam Hendricks, the Blue Jays, they get Springer, they get Yates. So a lot of these teams have gone out and made some huge moves, and the Dodgers haven't done that. The Dodgers have not done anything. They have been very quiet all offseason long. I don't know if they're waiting for an opportune time or whatever they might be doing, but all these other teams have made needed and I think advisable adjustments and additions to their rosters that is going to ultimately put them into a totally different category than they were last year. I mean, think about it. The Padres were really good last year, and we talked about them in a very high regard. But now coming into this year, after the acquisitions that they have and have gotten the past few weeks, oh my gosh, it's going to be a completely different conversation. Same thing with the Nationals, right? I mean, you've got, and not to mention, this is the other thing. These teams went out and got added pieces for an already solid foundation. If you think about it, look at who the Nationals had before they went out and got Schwarber, before they went out and got Lester, before they went out and got Josh Bell. They had Trey Turner, Juan Soto, Steven Strasburg, Max Scherzer, Patrick Corbin. Now they've got other pieces that are going to just build off of that. Then you've got the Padres. I mean, it's a grocery list of guys that the Padres have. You've got Manny Machado, you've got Will Myers, you've got Trent Grisham, Fernando Tatis, Austin Nola. Now you go out and you get some insane pitching with Blake Snell and Yu Darvish. You've got Mike Clevenger coming back in about a year or so whenever he gets off of Tommy John. So these teams have made added adjustments and needed adjustments And I don't think that the Dodgers have necessarily counteracted and kind of made any sort of counter moves towards doing that. Now, again, there are a lot of guys that are still out on the market. You've got guys like Trevor Bauer, who has recently been linked to the Dodgers, and I'm sure that they probably are thinking of the competitive balance tax and saying, well, do we want to spend more? Do we want to spend less? Are we going to go over? Are we going to go under? What's going to happen? Do we just go all in and get Trevor Bauer? We're going to add him to this already sick rotation. We've got a lot of really great players. We might be set. We might be just ready to rock and roll. So I really just don't know what's kind of going to happen, in all honesty, because there's just been so much spreading out of talent. They also have Ozuna, Real Muto. Where are these other guys going to go? They might not even go and play for the Dodgers or the Yankees or these major market teams. They might re-sign with other teams. Real Muto might stay in Philly. Ozuna, he could be on a team like the Blue Jays. I really could see him on the Blue Jays because they need a DH. They would probably have no problem, sticking him in the DH. You'd have Gritcha coming off the bench. You've got Gurriel, you've got Springer, you've got Hernandez. Vlad Jr. can play first or third. I mean, the guy apparently had lost a lot of weight. He really took care of his body in the offseason, and he's back to his full form again. And so going out and getting a DH like Ozuna, it's just going to be just added hitting. It's going to just be extra batting. It's going to be extra offense. Now, looking at some of the numbers that the Dodgers had in comparison to other teams and in comparison to their fellow opponents, they were first in the league in home runs, second in RBIs, they were first in runs, second in OPS, first in slugging, first in ERA, first in wins, first in whip, first in batting average against, and first in innings pitched. So right there, I just gave you a ginormous list of all sorts of things that they fell in either the first or second category, not to mention they fell in the top 5 or the top 10 and numerous others. So they clearly dominated last year. But again, there's been other teams that have built onto their really strong nucleuses and really strong kind of center cores of their team. And I just don't know if the Dodgers have done the necessary moves to counterbalance that. I mean, just looking at the Padres right now in their division, the Padres have addressed what they needed to address. They have plenty of hitting. And the reason why they probably were thinking, hey, we can't keep up with the Dodgers, it's we don't have the pitching. You go out and get Snell and Darvish, now you're completely in the ballgame. You're right back in it. And I think that, honestly, the Padres and Dodgers hitting, in my opinion, it could go toe-to-toe with each other. Their lineups are very comparable, and they're not that different from each other. The difference is the pitching. That is the major separating factor. And they went out and addressed that issue. And a lot of other teams, you look at some of these teams that went out and just got straight pitching, it probably was to be in mind of, hey, teams like the Dodgers, the Astros, the Red Sox, the Yankees, not really the Red Sox, but the Yankees, they've got some heavy lineups. They've got some really, really heavy lineups. We have to counterbalance that in some way. Let's go out and get some pitching. And I think that it was wise for the Padres to do what they did. The White Sox, they go get Lance Lynn and Liam Hendricks. So I think that this is going to be a very, very interesting season. Now, back to the original question. Do I buy or do I deny the idea that the Dodgers are going to the World Series and going to repeat? I'm going to completely deny this. I do not think it's going to happen. I could not see it happening. Ultimately, I just don't think that they'll be able to have not only the stamina to go all the way again. I mean, again, this was only 60 games last year. So, and they probably played 80, 82, so they really only played technically half of a full season. They only really made it to technically the All-Star break. So who knows what would have happened in the second half of the season. We've seen so many second half collapses. I always go to this point. The Pittsburgh Pirates, they were, I believe, tied or in second place for the NL Central 2019 or 2018, and then they wound up going, I believe, 4-32 in their first 36 games after the All-Star break. And then they went from about second to just completely dead last. So teams do have second half collapses. And who knows if that would have been the case for the Dodgers if it was a full season. And so I really just question that, this might have been a year that they kind of got away with and they kind of stole one, if you will, and they took advantage of the shortened season. And they said, hey, let's just go all out. It's 60 games. That's a fraction of what we normally play. And then we go to the playoffs and the World Series and we're going to go all the way. So again, ultimately, I don't see them repeating. I'm going to deny the claim. I think it's going to be somebody else. Could I see them maybe getting back to the same place? NLCS World Series? Yeah, I could maybe see that. I don't see them winning it, though. I have no faith in that. I really do think that it's going to be another team that's going to give them a big run for their money. And I think one of those teams might be a team that's in their division like the Padres. It's going to be very interesting this year. I'm really, really excited for this upcoming MLB season. But folks, that's going to wrap it up for us here today. As always, really appreciate you all listening to the GSMC Baseball Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I would like to ask that you please remember to subscribe to the show and write a nice review. That really helps us. Also, if you can please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, we'd also really appreciate that. As always, everyone, thanks so much for listening and have a fantastic day.